Hey, it's so good to be here. So great to join you, Lauren.
Yes, I'm so excited that you are here. But why don't you start off our conversation by talking about yourself? Tell us a little bit about yourself. Tell us about your family. Tell us how you got started in ministry and how you got started in the whole Enneagram world.
That's right. Well, I grew up in a very small town in northeast Nebraska and grew up Catholic. Went to college, got involved in the campus ministry of Cru, Campus Crusade for Christ. Some of you may recognize that. And found Jesus while I was a frat guy, led a Bible study, got involved in my campus ministry more and more, and Greek ministry, and decided to go on staff with Cru, doing college ministry full-time for about 9 years. So
Wow.
mainly here in Omaha, in the Nebraska area, and also K-State for a couple of years, leading the campus ministry team there. Then got invited to pastor, and never saw myself as a pastor, but got invited to be a pastor, and then eventually plant a church for the past 5 years. And I met my college sweetheart, Lindsay, at college through campus ministry. We got married. I had a long road of infertility, and then finally adopted two kids, so two boys that are now 11 and 9. The youngest is on the spectrum, so that's presented a lot of different challenges. And so this past January, I actually left full-time ministry after 18 years of ministry, and decided to partner with my wife in homeschooling our son and doing Enneagram work full time, working from home so I could be more available to my family. And it's exciting for me because I get to do more writing. I'm writing a 40-day devotional for every Enneagram type, and I can do lots of creative things now that I wasn't able to do before. But all to say, I have a lot of ministry experience, and so I'm looking forward to this conversation.
Yes, that's awesome. What a great story. And thanks for sharing about your boys. And that's just really sweet. Okay, so the big reason why we wanted you to jump on the podcast and to talk to kids ministry leaders is because so much of your Enneagram work is, one, your books about the gospel and your Enneagram number, I feel like have been really beneficial to the readers, but also I think a lot of your content is geared towards what does it look like to lead? And what does it look like to lead in light of the Enneagram and knowing that knowledge and helping you lead better and understand your teams better? And so I thought it would be a great conversation to kind of have you jump on and talk about how, as kids ministry leaders who often lead the most number of volunteers in the church, how can we lead well? And how can this tool really help us lead our teams? So kind of to kick us off, some people may know about the Enneagram, some people may not, but why don't you just give us a big overview of what it is, what are the 9 types, and then we'll continue to dive deeper as we go.
Yeah, so Ennea is 9. So Enneagram is a 9-pointed diagram. And so it lays out 9 archetypes or 9 personalities. And right off the bat, I should say that I don't believe that God just created 9 personality types. They're just 9 ways of categorizing various personalities. So, you have the Myers-Briggs and all these other personality types that are just good attempts to categorize humans so that we can understand each other and understand ourselves better. So the Enneagram has 9 personalities, and you can actually take it further, and there's, you can break it down into 3 subtypes of every type. So you could talk about 27 subtypes. So just think of it as like the primary colors in art class. You have your primary colors, and then when you mix those colors together, it creates this infinite amount of hues and shades that are beautiful. Yeah. That reflects God's creativity in creating us. And the Enneagram is motivation-based. So it's motivation-based, and it doesn't just talk about outward behavior like other personality tests do, but the Enneagram helps you understand why you do what you do. And that is why it's having such a profound effect on people's lives, and is really, I think, the most popular tool to use right now, not just in the church, but also in business. And so it really provides a map, a growth path chart for people. One pastor said the Enneagram is like sniper sanctification. It can help put the crosshairs on certain things that you didn't know that you even struggled with, that you might even be suppressing as you read through your Bible and daily Bible reading plan. And it's not a box. Like, it's not meant to put you in a box. as Ian Cron says, it's not about absolutes, but probabilities. So if you are type 8, for example, it's not going to say, here's absolutely who you are if you test as an 8
Right.
or self-identify as an 8. It's saying, here are some probabilities that 8s often struggle with or 8s are really good at that you should pay attention to if you want to know your calling, what you should do next, or these blind spots that may get you in trouble. So pay
Mm-hmm.
attention to these things. So it's really
Yeah.
helpful. Does that make sense?
Yeah, no, that's great. Why don't you quickly go through the 9 types just so we have a good kind of foundation, and then we'll make sure we have enough time to dive deeper into each one.
For sure. So type 1s are called the improvers or perfectionists. They are accurate, thorough, diligent, responsible, very moral and ethical. Care about justice, fairness, like to be in control. They fear being bad or like morally imperfect. They have a desire to be morally good and to be right. They focus on what needs improving. They will see the light bulb off in the kids' ministry room and be, oh, we need to do that. They're oftentimes carrying, their iPads or clipboards because they're just very organized. And they avoid making mistakes at all costs. I think the Apostle Paul was a type 1. Okay.
Interesting.
Type 2s, they are the helpers of befrienders. They are caring, warm, nurturing, generous, altruistic, considerate. They fear being rejected or being useless. They desire being loved and wanted. So you can see they're very relational. They focus on the needs of others, and they avoid their own needs and desires, oftentimes sacrificing everything for others. Okay, so you're going to see a lot of 2s jump into volunteer roles.
Yep.
So type 3s, I'm a type 3, and you said your husband is a type 3.
Yep.
We're successful, efficient, focused, practical, motivating, competent. We fear being failures, right? We're failing, being worthless if we're not winning or being successful. So we desire to be successful and to gain the admiration of those in church. We focus on our image and goals, and we avoid failure and inefficiency at all costs. So then you got the type 4s, who are the individualists and the romantics. They are deep, emotional, tasteful. They care a lot about the aesthetics, and they long for beauty and meaning. They're deep. They fear being flawed or inadequate. They desire to be unique and special. They focus on what's missing, and they avoid the common or the ordinary. They like doing things, very unique and being very special and being set apart. The type 5s are the investigators or the observers. They're intelligent, private, very curious, quiet, oftentimes knowledgeable. They fear being ignorant or invaded by others. They desire to be capable and competent. They focus on accumulating knowledge, and they avoid being uninformed or intruded upon by others. So type 6s, that's your type. The loyalists and my wife. So your husband's a 3 and you're a 6, and I'm a 3 and my wife is a 6 as well. That's fun.
Yep.
So the loyalists, sometimes called the devil's advocate. They are prepared, dedicated, dutiful, hardworking, loyal, and can be submissive or rebellious. Kind of depends on the day of the circumstance. They fear being without support and guidance. They're all about their wolf pack, right? They're about the community. They desire safety and security above all else. They focus on what could go wrong and strive to be prepared. And they avoid uncertainty and putting themselves in vulnerable positions. Type 7s are the enthusiasts or epicures. They are creative, fun, visionary, imaginative, playful, inspirational. They have a fear of being deprived or trapped. They desire to be happy and satisfied. They focus always on what's next, what's coming. They're always anticipating the next best thing, and they avoid pain and suffering at all costs. Then you have the type 8s or the challengers, or what I like to call them the defenders. They're outspoken, direct, opinionated, bold, decisive, tough, and protecting. They fear being weak or controlled by others. They desire to have power, protection, and influence. They focus on taking charge, and they avoid weakness and vulnerability at all costs. And then lastly, we have the type 9s, the peacemakers or mediators. They are good listeners, they are kind, they are agreeable, they are oftentimes more shy, they're patient, they're calm, and they are steady eddies. They fear being in conflict, right? They like having a peaceful life that's not disrupted, and they fear being overlooked. They want to be acknowledged. And they have a desire for peace and harmony. They focus on the expectations of others, so they're very supportive, and they avoid conflict and discomfort at all costs. So there you go. There's a quick rundown of all 9 types.
That's awesome. So if people didn't know their type before listening to this, maybe a couple of maybe perked their interest of like, oh, that sounds like me, or that sounds like me. But that will kind of be helpful as we dive in deeper into the type 9, or to the 9 types. But before we do that, let's talk about how have you seen, Tyler, people use this tool to lead teams? And now sometimes the question gets asked of like, well, does everybody need to figure out what their Enneagram type is? Or for leaders, do they just need to know their type? How have you seen people use this as a leadership tool, and maybe why it would bring value to a kids ministry team?
Yeah. Well, first of all, I should say I have a self-typing guide, and so people can download that for free. It's like 18 pages. And so
Awesome.
If you want more of what I just said, you can download it for free off my website. So it's like tylerzach.com/free. And so you can just download that, and it'll have, how each type operates in the flesh versus in the spirit, and just some more great things that you can get for free.
Yeah.
So I'm a big proponent of you self-typing or self-validating your type rather than like taking a test and then somebody else telling you what you are. You can just look at all these lists of motivations and be like, yeah, I resonate the most with that one.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
But in terms of your question about why it's useful is, I think, God through the Holy Spirit produces in us self-awareness. And, John Calvin said we can't grow unless we are aware of ourselves and aware of God. So you need both of those things. And we can grow without the Enneagram, but I found that the Enneagram just speeds up the process of knowing yourself and knowing other people. If I would have had it in premarital counseling before I got married, it would have saved me a ton of conflicts with my wife. Because it gave us probabilities about ourselves that would have been super helpful to know ahead of time. I mean, we found them out, but it just would have been so helpful to know ahead of time. For example, like 3s care a lot about their image and don't like looking bad. So when Lindsay was busy getting ready and we were late to church, I would get mad. And why are you getting so mad? Well, it's because you made me look bad. Because we're getting to church late and I look like a failure. It just things like that that we could have caught earlier in terms of knowing why I'm getting mad. Because oftentimes I don't even know why I'm getting mad. So it can help you understand yourself better. You can understand your spouse or your ministry leader better and have more empathy towards them. So for Lindsay as a 6 and you as a 6, you naturally are just thinking about, okay, how can I keep my family or these kids safe? And so when you start getting agitated, why somebody doesn't want to do a background check or somebody doesn't want to do something and you're getting frustrated, then you can, understand why you're getting frustrated is because people seem to be throwing safety out the window and caution out the window. And we, in kids ministry, we need to protect kids at all costs. That's a value of God's. And so just by helping you to know yourself and helping you to know others and why they do the things they're doing can just produce a lot of more empathy and help you to work through conflict better. And as you know, when it comes to church and ministry and conflict, it happens all the time. And people either stop volunteering or they go to a different church. That's just the reality of ministry.
Yeah, totally.
Those things happen all the time, and you can get so burned out and just depressed by
Mm-hmm.
conflict that happens in church. But I think the Enneagram and self-awareness can help prevent some of those things or help you to understand why some of those things are happening.
Yeah.
Does that make sense?
No, I think that's really helpful. And one thing that you said, I think is so important when talking about this tool and leading kids ministry is the empathy piece of like, when you understand why someone is so passionate about this small area of your ministry that you may not be passionate about, it allows you to open your eyes and say, oh, this is the way that God created them. They created this person to think about the lights in the classroom and to think about the level of the music and to think about the furniture, or the background check example is such a great example. And I just think that allows you as a leader to have more empathy. And like, I think what comes to mind is like, sometimes there are volunteers who are so not intense, that's not the right word, but just so they're paying really close attention to discipline and making sure that kids are following the rules and that their classroom is listening and obeying and following the rules for Sunday morning. Or maybe you don't even have any rules and there's volunteers being like, hey, can we get a list of like rules that we're supposed to follow? And it's like, well, that's because that's how God made their brain to work. And we can have empathy towards that, and we could lead them in a way that values who they are. And I think all of those voices are so important when it comes to just seeing the kingdom and making sure that ministries are well valued and well rounded in terms of people and voices and ideas and thoughts. So I love that. I think the empathy piece is huge. I think that's just something that comes to my mind. And just as leaders, I feel like we could always have more empathy towards our teams. So if this is a tool that could help you do that, then I am in for it. So I love that.
Yeah. A lot of problems, as you know, in kids ministry or marriage, or relationships happen because of competing values.
Mm-hmm.
We're fighting because we're trying to fight for our value. And sometimes we overdo those things or underdo other values.
Yeah.
If that's a way to say it, or don't care about certain values.
Yep.
And so a 6 is going to care about stability. We need stability to be healthy in this kids ministry. Whereas a 7 is like, no, if we're going to grow, we need to adapt and we need to change things. We need to change the curriculum, which I'll talk about in a little bit. But you can see that we're all valuing different things, and we need to listen to each other and work as a team to work on those values. And if we're championing ours too much and not paying attention to other values, it's going to create conflict.
Yeah. That's awesome. Okay, let's jump in to talking about each type, and you're going to share some things about that specific type, and we're going to chat about it and kind of figure out how maybe kids ministry leaders could really lead this specific type well, or if you're a kids ministry leader and you're leading out of this type, how are these tips and tricks helpful for you? So, Tyler, why don't you kick us off with the first type that we're going to talk about?
Yeah, so I see a lot of type 1s being kids ministry leaders. I don't know why, but I just see a lot of type 1s in kids ministry leadership. Their working superpower is to spot mistakes and improve things. They like progress and making things better. They're highly responsible. No one is more responsible than them. They have high attention to detail. They have high standards for behavior, and they are just well structured and organized. But their blind spots are they often think they know the right way to do things and can become critical of others. They can seep out in sideways comments that make their criticisms or their frustration with volunteers very clear. When people don't do what they're told or don't show up to volunteer. And they can be too rigid. Their personality can just be too, like, we got to improve things. We got to have high standards. They can just come off a little too rigid. And so my leadership tips for them are to delegate more, right? To let go of responsibility, even if balls are going to get dropped, because they can't, it's too much frustration and pressure to do it themselves. So they need to release control, delegate more, and then lighten up more to make, volunteering for kids ministry fun, like fun, and not feel like it's this duty, so just to lighten up more, smile more, and induce a sense of like positivity into their leadership.
Yeah, that's great. Okay, I thought of a question, and this goes kind of for all types, but I want to make sure that the kids ministry leader who's hearing this, who they're probably like, oh, that volunteer is definitely a 1. That like, why, what is the danger of that? But also like, yes, you can acknowledge that this is their skill set. Like everybody needs somebody on their team that can take note when things need to be fixed. That's such an important role. But I also have been in this spot before. You have that one volunteer who says something is wrong every single Sunday. And you're like, man, can I just get one Sunday where things go right? And so how do you navigate that as a kids ministry leader that's not necessarily a 1, but maybe has a 1 on their team, that it constantly feels like they're not doing well enough or they're not good enough at their job because the ones are always over here being like, this needs fixed.
Yes. I love what you just said. And, you need to think of yourself first when we're going through these. Again, the first order of business is self-awareness. So be thinking about yourself before others. And then, you're going to come across these types and think, oh man, I can think of this person and this is why they drive me crazy, which is oftentimes what happens with type 1s. They get a bad rap because they can be overly critical, right? I think a lot of the Pharisees were 1s. They're unhealthy 1s. But you also have to pay attention to their values. Like 1s just don't want any balls to drop. They want things to be excellent. They have high standards, and that's going to help your kids ministry thrive. And they're more responsible than you. So you might check out of, quit volunteering or move to a different church, but they're going to be responsible. They're not going to drop the ball. And so we need to praise them and think about those things think about the good things as we're talking about each type.
Yeah. And I love that, shifting your mindset to not saying they're nagging on you personally, but their motivation is they want things to be the right way. They want them to be safe. They want to excel. They want to do things well. And that's maybe not a direct correlation with your leadership ability, but just their innate gifting to see things and want them to be better. And so I think kind of flipping it on its side and saying, oh gosh, thank you so much for noticing that. We're going to get it done this week. Or maybe because you helped me, like all of these ways that we can in really turn that conversation into more of a positive than thinking, man, they're always thinking things are wrong and all of that. It could be really negative. But I love that, just switching it up a little bit. So that's really helpful. Do you have one more thing about the 1s?
Should we go to type 2?
Okay. Yep. Let's jump into type 2.
Okay. Type 2's working superpower is serving others and showing empathy. They're great with kids. Great in being empathetic, showing their feelings, being compassionate, being very nurturing and supportive. They have strong relational skills. And adults just feel safe handing their kids off to type 2 volunteers. Their blind spots, though, are they can never say no to you. You'll ask them to do a million things, and they'll do a million things for you. That sounds great, doesn't it?
Yeah.
Well, yes, but that is until they burn out. They give and they give, but secretly, and have to admit this, oftentimes 2s don't want to admit this, they secretly do all these things to get lots of praise and validation. And if they don't receive that back, then I say they Hulk out and eventually will come to you and it will surprise the heck out of you and they will be angry. They'll Hulk out and they say, I serve at this church more than anyone, but haven't gotten X, Y, or Z. And so sometimes they may just leave the church altogether for feeling unappreciated. And so my tip for 2s, for volunteers, is to say no more, right? To put a limit on your serving and practice self-care. Practice self-care. Put the oxygen mask on yourself first. Right. Yeah. And again, they are the first to volunteer, which is great, but they're also the first to burn out. So they just need to pay more attention to themselves and make sure that they bring a healthy version of themselves to serving.
Yeah. I think that's such a smart idea, is to limit the number of serving, whether that's like, hey, we ask our volunteers to serve every other week. And this season, we're not asking more. But maybe there is a season where you do say, okay, now we're asking volunteers to serve every week. For the kids ministry staff member, how do you love a 2 really well? And maybe how do you approach the conversation of like, hey, are you being healthy in the amount that you're giving and that you're serving? Kind of how do you have that conversation of making sure that 2s are not going to get burnt out?
Hmm. Man, just how to have the conversation with them.
Yeah, or just what are your tips and tricks for those staff members who see their volunteers that are twos serving and serving and serving and serving, and they want to be proactive so that nobody on their team really hits that Hulk out
Yeah,
moment, that
yeah,
burnout moment?
yeah. Well, you got to just be aware of how much stuff you're asking them to do, and
Yeah.
ask them to do less, and be challenging them. Say, hey, did you take a break? Or,
Mm-hmm.
hey, do you want to take this fall off of serving so you
Mm-hmm.
can
Yeah.
just rest? You've served 7 years in a row. And now it's time for a sabbatical or for a break.
Mm-hmm.
And,
Yeah.
give that opportunity to them. Just make sure that you're caring for them, because they're not superhuman. They're not Jesus. They're not the
Yeah.
Holy Spirit. They can't help everyone and do everything without there being consequences for their soul, and ultimately for the
Yeah.
relationship with the church. Because I've seen twos get burnt out and leave our church
Mm-hmm.
over this issue, and you don't want to lose them. They're amazing people.
Yeah.
And so let's not treat them as cogs in the machine, and just to better ourselves or our church, but to care about them as people.
Yeah. I love that. That's so good. All right. Number 3.
Okay, type threes. Their working superpower is to get stuff done and look good doing it. Threes are oftentimes just impressing people with how much they get done. They're like, wow, how did they
Mm-hmm.
do that? They have great organizational and admin skills. They're great with social media. They can write curriculum. They're excellent communicators who are great at casting vision from stage, and just know how to recruit and build teams and get it done. If you're going to start a kids ministry, they'll get it done.
Yep.
The blind spot is, and don't nod at these, Lauren, since your husband's a 3. They can put tasks and goals over caring for people, or put tasks over volunteers, or make the volunteers feel like they're not the highest priority. They might feel like
Mm-hmm.
people might feel like the highest priority is efficiency, producing and growing the ministry, making it
Yeah.
bigger. And they can wear a performing mask to get people to admire them, and use kids ministry to boost their own image, to boost their own image of success. And so they may go to another. I've seen this with 1-3. They went to another church because they were volunteering, and then they wanted to lead the kids ministry, and we had to say no. And so they just left their community altogether, because oftentimes they want a status or a title.
Right.
And so my leadership tip for threes is to serve without needing a title or a role.
Yeah.
And to see kids ministry as a way to sacrifice, like in a good way to be Jesus, rather than seeing it as another rung on the ladder of success, or to
Yeah.
boost your image to church leaders.
Yeah.
So
that's awesome.
That's threes.
Yeah, I think that conversation comes into play a lot, because we talk about quite a bit of sometimes kids ministry leaders aren't in all of those decision-making meetings, and they're not at, maybe it's elder meetings or the pastoral staff or the lead team or whatever the phrase is at your church. And sometimes it can feel like a big bummer. And I can feel this being a huge pain point for threes, not being invited into those bigger conversations and those big decision-making conversations. And I love what you had to say of like, just serve, and just serve not for your fame, but to bring glory to who God is and what Jesus has done for us. And so I think that is such a huge encouragement.
Good. Want to talk about 4s now?
Yes, let's do it.
Okay. Type 4's working superpower is, they're a little harder to wrap your minds around. 4s. They're very unique. They have this depth and creativity that inspires others to find a meaning and wholeness in their work and in life. Their creativity makes them good at writing curriculum also, coming up with creative crafts and fun projects for kids. We had a kids ministry leader that was so good at, like, every Sunday you'd come and the kids would be doing these amazing creative projects, just engaging them, and they just loved it. They soaked it up, because this 4 was just inducing their creativity into kids ministry. And they just have they do a really good job of being compassionate to kids who are suffering, who have been bullied, right? They just connect emotionally well with kids. Their blind spot is that they can be overly sensitive and dramatic when you're working with them. They can be a little too emotional, and they have difficulty with routine and structure on average. So they may keep things too spontaneous and too free flowing when kids ministry may need more consistency and structure to grow and expand. Right. So my leadership tip for them is to use their passion and creativity to make kids ministry unique and special, right? To not shy away from that and to go up to your kids ministry leader now or go up to your church leader now and say, hey, I have these creative ideas that we can we do these things?
Yeah.
And care more about productivity and structure, which are things that are needed for a kids ministry to scale and grow.
Yeah.
So I'd also care about the businessy type things as well.
Yeah, I love that. I love fours because that what you said of they just bring so much creativity. And like when you're talking about telling kids a story about Jesus or a story about the Bible, sometimes you've got to be creative and you've got to kind of engage kids in their creative, imaginative mind. And so I think fours are a huge asset to kids ministry. I love it.
Type fives, their superpower is that they have this analytical power that drives them to research everything in depth and then know how all systems fit together. So they are really smart teachers in teaching the kids curriculum. They can create their own curriculum because they're good researchers and wise. They're good with technology oftentimes. They're good problem solvers. They're prepared, and they're very self-sufficient. Like once you get a 5 on board, they're not going to need a lot of help or instruction. Yep. They're just going to do their job. The blind spot is they can come off as very quiet and aloof, unless they're a 5 with a 4 wing or a 1-to-1 subtype of 5 that can look like a 4. So there are some more emotional 5s, but oftentimes 5s are more quiet and aloof. And they may get angry when you ask them to do something last minute. They have a really hard time being spontaneous, okay? And so my tip for 5s is to be more expressive with kids, or if you're a kids ministry worker who's a 5 or a leader, like be more expressive with parents. They want to see that you're, engaged and fun for their kids to be around. So be more expressive than you think you need to be. And then be more okay with socializing, right? When you're doing kids ministry, you need to socialize with other volunteers before you start volunteering or socialize with other people in the room. You have to go to kids ministry trainings, right? Be okay and see that socializing is a part of the job and to lean into that rather than isolate yourself.
Yeah, that's so good. At one point in my ministry career, my kids associate was a 5, and I loved her ability to research. She knew the best of the best out there, but also I would have to often prep her of like, hey, I've got this big idea. I want to implement it like tomorrow. And she'd be like, And so we would have a lot of that like prep conversation of like, hey, we're going to shift gears a little bit. Like we're going to be a little bit spontaneous over here. So it's good. I think they're important to have on your team, especially for that like research and the very thoughtful skill set. So, okay, let's talk about 6. This is me. So we can talk about it.
Yeah.
Oh yeah. The best number.
6s are really type 10s. They, in my book. My wife will probably listen to this podcast because she'll be super excited about it. And I can't say that for all the podcasts I've been on, but this is one that's near and dear to her heart. Okay, so 6s solve organizational problems and protect their team and protect the kids through going through the process of risk analysis. Right? They more than anyone will keep kids ministry safe. They know that there are predators out there and will do everything possible to run background checks, put safety measures in place in the room. They're also very responsible like ones and very dedicated. So they'll stay in their position for a long time, right? They're very steady and very consistent. And also they're very good prepared teachers as well. I just know a lot of 6s in the education world. The blind spot is they can care too much about what could go wrong. And so their demands for safety and extra safety protocols can be exhausting to their volunteers or their team. They can just come off like Debbie Downers or overly serious. And they're not good with change for the most part. They might complain when you change curriculum or readjust the kids' room, keep readjusting the kids' rooms, or the the main pastor or lead pastor wants to do things differently or hire some more people. They like consistency and don't do really well with change. So could get very
Yeah.
frustrated with that. Okay, so the leadership tips for sixes are to plan for change and to stay flexible, especially in a church plant or growing ministry. And then learn how to have safety and concern expectations that are in proportion to your church's size and stage of maturity. So if you're starting out as a church plant and don't have a lot of resources yet, you can't demand, that the church spends $5,000 on safety gear and all these
Right.
things that are out of proportion to the church's size and stage, if that makes any sense.
Mm-hmm.
Background
No, that's
checks,
great.
absolutely, but
Yes,
to have
always.
reasonable expectations for their ministry leaders.
Yeah, that's great. I love that. All right, let's jump into number 7.
Okay, type 7s. The working superpower is they have this charisma that makes work and volunteering enjoyable and just leads the ministry to new and exciting opportunities. So they are master recruiters. They're amazing with social media, like 3s. They are good at casting vision. They like being on stage. They bring tons of people energy to volunteers and parents. So we have a type 7 that's been the kind of the face of kids ministry, and she is amazing. The blind spot is they are easily distractible. Squirrel, they might be the first to leave their volunteer post or their kids ministry director position if things get hard or if they get bored. They might try to bring in other ministry responsibilities with it because they like multitasking and doing all kinds of different roles. And they could be flaky or unreliable if they're starting out in kids ministry and you just recruited them. They might not be there every Sunday or on time. So the leadership tips for 7s is, don't change things up so much if you're leading kids ministry, because 7s are constantly switching new curriculum. Oh, let's try this curriculum and let's change these rooms around and let's do it this way. And it's exciting to them, but it's chaotic to everyone else.
Yeah.
So they need to stay committed to their role and stay committed to the way things are longer than they probably want.
Yeah.
So those are my tips for 7s.
Yeah. I feel like 7s are always like the greatest hype person for like large group time or welcoming new families, or like I think we're in the summer and so there's like VBS and camp. Like you want those high energy, exciting people up on stage. And so that's where I feel like 7s thrive, in those areas of like something like that is changing kind of consistently, of like, it's exciting. We're playing the game. We're listening to this song. We're doing these hand motions, like just very upbeat and exciting. So I love that.
Exactly. Right on.
Yep.
Okay, type 8s. Their working superpower is they have decisive leadership that gets momentum going and empowers people to take action. They help the church to climb mountains and do the seemingly impossible. They will build a strong and scalable kids ministry. They're also great on stage. They know how to put people in the right seats. They care about protecting kids and keeping kids safe. So very much like 6s in terms of being protectors. And they aren't afraid to recruit volunteers. They will ask people to do the impossible. Like, they'll ask volunteers to be there 80 hours a week. They're not afraid to ask for those kinds of things, because it's all about sacrifice and duty for them. And they aren't afraid of conflict and addressing problems. So again, type 8s like type 1s get a hard time for being their type sometimes. And sometimes people don't see the positives as much with the type 8, because they can be a little intimidating. They can have a really strong personality. But hey, there are many kids ministries where parents put their kids in and there are issues and there's bullying and there's all these things happening and nobody does anything about them. But 8s do. Yeah. They will have the hard conversation with another parent if your kid is bullied. They'll have a hard conversation with somebody who's acting weird around kids. Like they're not afraid to confront those types of people. So in that way, they're really great. The blind spots are intimidation. They are prone to having a tough exterior, and they don't want to look weak. But their bluntness oftentimes scares people a little bit. And so they might not be super friendly or warm with parents and volunteers. Sometimes they can go too hard and too fast and burn volunteers out when they push too hard and try to do the impossible in one semester. They may also get into leadership. They may become the kids ministry director and then try to turn things around too fast, causing people to fall off the ship because they get in there and they break things and want to rebuild things. And so they can just do things a little too quickly. So the leadership tips for them is to try to dial down their intensity, to smile more when they're talking to parents and kids, to bring out that warmth side of them because they have it and oftentimes comes out when they're around kids. But they also need to bring that out with adults. And they need to be affirming and encouraging to volunteers rather than treating them as soldiers who must do their duty.
Yeah.
So those are the tips for type 8s.
That's awesome. Something that comes to mind is for ministry staff people who are leading type 8s, who their voice and their presence is really important in the ministry, but sometimes a ministry staff person who's not an 8 does feel intimidated by a volunteer that they're supposed to be leading. And so how do you recommend, or what are your tips on like leading 8s when the 8s are not in charge? They're just on the team like everybody else, but naturally sometimes 8s come to the top of leadership and that's just where their gifting lies. But how do you recommend leading them specifically well?
It's a great question. 8s, oftentimes, like you said, rise to management, to leadership positions. And you won't find a lot of 8s in supportive roles because they naturally are like chiefs who they go and they want to lead their own thing or start their own thing. So if you're leading an 8 and they signed up to volunteer, just giving them a lot of trust, giving them autonomy to do their thing, don't try to micromanage them, don't try to control them, but give them the freedom and give them the guardrails is going to be really helpful. And allowing them to try some new things. Like let them climb a mountain. Let them go produce a new curriculum or oversee a new project that they can run at and get excited because they get excited with challenges. So you need to make sure that you're challenging them. Otherwise, they're going to get bored with just the monotony and routine of doing it. And just on a personal level, challenge them to, exercise, stay healthy, find an outlet in life, a hobby in life where they can exert their energy and like burn off energy because they're gut based, meaning they're body types who feel everything in their body and just have a lot more energy than we do. They're like God's lightning rods. And so they just need a place to burn off energy because oftentimes people say to them, you're too much. You're too much for me. And I have a type 8 son, my 9-year-old who's on the autism spectrum. He's an 8. And so they need outlets to be able to not care about or to be in environments where people won't shame them for bringing in their full self. So they just need those outlets, if that makes sense.
Yeah, that's awesome. All right, let's finish off with type 9.
All right. So the type 9 working superpower is to create a harmonious space by mediating people and differences that cause conflict, and they support others selflessly. They're very selfless. So oftentimes 2s and 9s mistype because they can look a lot like each other. They have this calm and peaceful presence with kids. They smile all the time. They're super friendly. And along with 2s are the first to volunteer because they want to be supportive to their community. The blind spot, though, is that they hate conflict. So they might not, in contrast to the 8s, they might not address problems in kids ministry. They might not bring up hard subjects or topics with the kids ministry leader. And they might not have hard conversations with parents when issues happen. So they need to create more space for conflict and lean into conflict, knowing that peace faking is not going to help kids ministry, but they need to have hard conversations to make peace sometimes, to work through situations and build parents' trust with the church. And they also need to be aware of being passive aggressive. So if you ask a type 9 to volunteer and you've texted them 9 times and they're not responding back to you, it's because they're being passive aggressive. They have a hard time of saying no or disagreeing with you. So they just won't talk or won't respond back. And so they can be more passive aggressive. And so you just need to get them to disagree with you more and to speak up more. And so that really goes into the leadership tips. So when it comes to leadership tips, they have to know that protecting kids means having hard conversations at times. And if a type 9 feels that they're being overlooked, or if they're just being a cog in the machine, which oftentimes they do, because they're so supportive like 2s and have a hard time saying no like 2s, they can just be asked and asked and asked, and 9s will do until the point where they get frustrated because they just feel like they're being used.
Yeah.
And so if you're a type 9, you need to speak up and talk about your feelings and talk about the ways you feel overlooked, so that you don't get stubborn and angry and just leave the church altogether, rather than having those hard conversations. So lean in, don't be afraid to rock the boat a little bit, 9s. So those are my tips for type 9s.
That's awesome. And I think leading 9s, you kind of have to probe a little bit. I feel like you have to kind of ask the question of like, what do you think? Or maybe it's you invite someone who identifies as a type 9, and you go out to coffee or go out to lunch where you can have a more one-on-one conversation instead of asking them to share their opinion in front of everybody, but say like, hey, I would actually love to know what you're thinking and what your thoughts are and what your feedback is. And kind of going that extra mile may allow your 9s on your team to feel more valued and hopefully not get burnt out as fast when you actually hear them. And so that's really great.
And one more thing for 9s.
Yes.
A lot of 9s are very creative. A lot of 9s are songwriters. Walt Disney was a 9. And so don't be afraid to ask your kids ministry leader or your team if you can write some curriculum or write some songs or do some creative things in kids ministry.
Yeah.
Don't be afraid to take up more space. Like 8s take up space and need to make space for others. 9s need to walk into the kids ministry room and take up more space and be more directive and be more forthright with their ideas, because they're so good at what they do, and we need to hear their voice. Yeah,
that's awesome. Gosh, I hope this is helpful for those ministry leaders that are listening that are leading teams or trying to figure out how to better their own leadership ability. And so I'm definitely going to link what did you call it at the beginning?
The self-typing guide?
Yes, the self-typing guide. That's what I was thinking. We're going to link that in the show notes, because I think walking through something like that with, maybe it's your leadership team, or maybe if your volunteer team is small enough to where you could like gather everyone together and do this together. I think this could be really beneficial for your teams and how you lead and how they continue to lead and invest in the kids in your ministry. So Tyler, I'm so thankful that you were able to join us and jump through all of those types. And I think your tips were so helpful. But before you go, the last question we always ask is, if you were talking to someone brand new in ministry, what would be your words of encouragement or advice?
Yeah, when I've been through ministry and been through the mountains and the valleys, and what I would say is, in giving advice, is to stick with ministry longer than you think, to stick with people longer than you think, because it's going to surprise you at how many people walk in the flesh sometimes, and people are going to leave the church for really bad reasons, and you're going to have all these things happen, but to kind of expect these things, not to have this rose-colored glasses view of ministry, but to realize that it's like an extended family. And as a pastor, there's so much more pressure, because in the workplace, you can kind of act a certain way. Everyone's getting paid to do their duty. When you're volunteering, like, nobody has to stick around. No one's getting paid. So it's harder to cast vision, harder to get people to be responsible, harder for people to show up and serve on a Sunday morning. And so you just got to have that expectation that people need coaching, they need vision, they need inspiring. And so, to expect that people are going to leave, to expect that people are going to drop the ball at times, but to not let that, lead to you throwing in the towel and giving up. But to continue just to have a healthy relationship with Jesus, being healthy when you come on Sunday morning, and being more resilient and being more tough-skinned when it comes to some of those hard situations, knowing that God's going to keep providing. He's going to keep bringing people into your ministry. He's going to keep bringing volunteers. Just do your best to be resilient and to not just have this expectation that people should volunteer, but to really cast a vision and show them why it's beautiful to volunteer and how it's impacting kids' lives, and to share stories of kids' lives being impacted to really inspire people. So to have an inspire and align mentality versus sort of a command and control mentality when you're working with volunteers. So casting vision is just huge. And there's some types that are just find it naturally, like 3s and 7s, but other types can do it as well. So for 6s, rather than just thinking about all the things that could go wrong and helping lead a healthy organization in that way, do the opposite. Think about all the things that could go right. And so send out an email saying, here are all the things that are going to go right this semester for kids ministry. Here's what we're going to accomplish. And to do the opposite of what you typically do. That's going to inspire people so much, so much more. So those are a couple of things that come to the top of my head.
That's awesome. I love those. That's so encouraging, and just continues to give our ministry leaders just the encouragement that they need to continue to persevere. I love that so much. Okay, Tyler, if people want to connect with you, if they want to learn more about your books that you're writing, your devotionals that you're writing, your coaching that you have available, where can they find you?
Yeah, the easiest place is my website to start. So Tyler, Tyler, Zach, that's Z-A-C-H. Z-A-C-H, like the musician Bach. But it's Zach. So tylerzach.com. And then if you go to tylerzach.com/free, that's where you'll find the self-typing guide. You can also download an article for free called Should Christians Use the Enneagram? Because that's kind of a hot topic question right now.
Yep.
So I have a 3,000-word essay on why Christians can. And I even did a deep dive. I have a whole e-course on Should Christians Use the Enneagram, discussing the origins of the Enneagram. And so that's a course that's available on my website. And I have 5-day free devotionals. So if you're a type 6 but don't want to buy the type 6 book yet, but want to test drive it, you can go download a 5-day devotional for free on your type. And I apologize, I'm working on type 5 and type 8. I'm going to write those books this year. But you can get a free 5-day devotional for all the other types available on my website as well.
That's awesome. So we'll link all of those things in the show notes. So you can head straight to the show notes for this episode and find all the links to Tyler's website. We'll link to where Tyler's on social media so that you can follow him there and continue to get the great content that he's putting out. So I'm so grateful, Tyler, that you were able to join us on the podcast. And we're definitely going to have you back, because I feel like we only just scratched the surface. There's so much more we could have talked about. And so I'm just so grateful that you were able to chat with us.
I loved it, Lauren. Thanks so much for what you're doing. And for all those listening, thank you so much for being resilient and working in kids ministry. It's oftentimes